Hello, everyone. Welcome to Agora. I'm your host, Gabriel Andrade, broadcasting from Maracaibo, Venezuela. And joining me today on the other end of the line is Professor John Mueller from Ohio State University. Professor Mueller is the author of the book Atomic Obsession, Nuclear Alarmism from Hiroshima to Al Qaeda. Hello, Professor. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
What's this book about?
Well, it's about nuclear alarmism, that basically, ever since the weapons were developed, people have been exaggerating their importance and spending huge amounts of money on them, which has mostly been wasteful. The countries that have gotten nuclear weapons since World War II have basically found no use for them in wars or even as threats, particularly. The idea that a terrorist would get a nuclear weapon is extremely small. So they mostly, what they've done is it caused a lot of agony and a lot of people to be concerned and a lot of people losing sleep. But and they certainly have affected defense budgets. People spent a lot of money on the weapons, but I don't think the world would be very much different if they'd never been invented.
But why run the risk? I mean, we can agree that, yes, it would be hard for terrorists to get a hold of these weapons, but in the case that they use them, the consequences would be very devastating. So, I mean, we should take some measures in order to prevent that. That's a conventional wisdom. What's wrong with that argument?
Well, it depends on the measures. The probability is extremely low, one in millions or billions, that they could actually come up with them. However, the efforts to make it even lower are fairly cheap. For example, and things you might want to do anyway. For example, making sure that you know where all the fissile material is in the world, so that it can't. If it is stolen, you'd know that immediately, and you can also protect it if it hasn't been stolen. You'd want to do that anyway because you don't want it wandering around. And another thing you can do is run sting operations by the police. Send people around trying to buy material, bomb material, or pretending that they're selling it, and so you can disrupt any kind of real market for the goods. And those measures like that are really very cheap and probably worth doing no matter what. So I don't have a great deal of problems with trying to make the probability even lower. But what I wanted to stress is the probability already is extremely low.
Well, you're addressing here non-state actors, but what about state actors? What about Iran and North Korea? I mean, Western opinion about those countries is that they're pretty dangerous, and if they get a hold of these, and apparently they do have the capacity to develop a bomb, that would be a whole different story than from a few Islamic terrorists hiding in some caves. I mean, presumably in Iran there are some nice laboratories, and in North Korea it's also the case. So would the approach to state actors be different?
Well, in the case of state actors, you have a lot of history, obviously going back to 1945, and no country has done anything with nuclear weapons except to stoke their egos and make themselves seem important, or to deter real or imagined threats. So and I think that would be the case with Iran, and has been the case with North Korea that does have weapons. And so expending huge efforts to try to keep these countries from getting the weapons, it seems fairly foolish. It has also been the case that nuclear weapons have gone to big important countries, that have leaders who are basically crazy when they got them. For example, when Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union got the weapon in 1949, he was clearly going crazy. And when Mao Zedong in China got the weapon in 1964, he had just brought China through the Great Leap Forward, which resulted in the deaths of 30 to 40 million Chinese from starvation. So what you had is really crazy leaders essentially getting the weapons, but they never did anything with the weapons except to deter what they thought would be threats, and to have, say how great we are because we have these weapons. They basically haven't done anything with them. So if you're worried about North Korea, or you're a little country like North Korea, or a fairly small country like Iraq, or like Iran, small compared to China or the Soviet Union, then what you have to demonstrate is somehow the leaders there are even crazier, much, much, much crazier than Mao or Stalin were when they got the weapons, and I don't think that's very easy to prove.
Well, but precisely the fact that the North Korean leader is crazy seems to be a bigger threat because, I mean, you cannot trust that he's going to use rationality when he handles this weapon. And let's say that in some rage over some international affair, he decides to strike South Korea, nobody would be able to stop him. I mean, precisely the fact that he's not rational, according to public Western opinion, is what really makes him dangerous.
You think he's more irrational than Stalin was? Stalin wandering around the Kremlin with when he had nuclear weapons, saying, "It's getting so I can't trust anybody, not even myself." In other words, you couldn't even call him paranoid because not only did he not trust anybody else, but he didn't trust himself as well. And he was also in a very large country, which eventually had quite a large number of nuclear weapons. North Korea, it's not clear whether the leader is crazy or not. He seems to be having a lot of trouble just basically keeping control of the situation and keeping himself in power. And also, if he did launch a nuclear weapon, the chances of it going off are limited because of the general incompetence and backwardness of North Korea. So I mean, I'm very happy if they did not have nuclear weapons, but I don't think it presents very much of a danger. Now, the alternative has been to kill a lot of people. The wars, particularly the war in Iraq, was designed primarily to stop Saddam Hussein from getting nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, but particularly nuclear weapons. The result of that war has been over 100,000 people have died. So consequently, efforts to prevent proliferation have killed hundreds of thousands of people, whereas nuclear weapons, since World War II, have killed 0 people. That should be kept in mind as well.
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's a major argument you have there. And we can agree that the war in Iraq has caused great damage that's unwarranted. But what about nuclear disarmament? I mean, there's a lot of opinion in the West that if the United States and Britain were to disarm, that would pave the way for Iran and other potential nuclear powers to use their weapons at their will. I mean, is a nuclear disarmament dangerous in the sense that they would no longer be deterred from using their own nuclear weapons?
They would, they'd be deterred by lots of things. It's not the case that all nuclear weapons are going to go away or all military capabilities go away. And if they did try to use them, they would be, subject to a huge amount of military backlash, big time. We already know that because when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, everybody ganged up on him to push him back. And so consequently, if Iran basically used the weapons or threatened to use the weapons even, you would expect something like that to happen. The regime would have to, if the regime wanted to use the weapons, they would have to realize, and I think they do realize, that it would be the end of the regime. They'd have to be suicidal. And there's no indication that the Iranian regime wants to go out of business and to be destroyed by the retaliation. If Iran used them, or threatened to use them, they'd be quickly surrounded by a coalition of virtually every country in the world and all the military power in the world. And it could be used against them, whether you use nuclear weapons against them or not. You could use military force against them to destroy the regime, and I think they realize that would actually be a likely outcome. So I don't see any great danger from that. I would be happy to have a certain amount of nuclear disarmament because the weapons are basically useless substantially, and because they cost so much money. During the Cold War, the United States spent on nuclear weapons and the armaments to use them, bombers and missiles and so forth, spent as much money as the entire property of as much as the entire economy of the United States, except for the value of the land. In other words, if instead of spending all that money on nuclear weapons, the United States had spent the money on buying the wealth of the economy, it would over those period of time, it could have bought everything except for the land. So that gives you some idea of how huge amounts of money have been spent on these weapons. They have not been necessary to deter anybody. and they have not been useful even for the use of threats in wars. So they've been basically useless. In the meantime, fears about them have gotten the United States into some terrible wars, including the one in Iraq.
Right.
So those all things have to be kept in balance.
Right. I want to go back to Iran real quick. Some people do say that Iran is indeed suicidal because of its religious element. I mean, Ahmadinejad talked about the return of the Mahdi and all of that. And, well, the apocalypse, what better image of an apocalypse than a nuclear weapon going off? And if that is indeed a theocracy, I mean, wouldn't some religious clerics be willing to use these weapons in order to bring forth the second coming of Jesus and the Mahdi and the final judgment?
Well, they'd have to be totally crazy, and they'd have to want to have everything go down. They do seem to be interested in spreading their religious point of view and defending Shiite Muslims around the world and so forth. So they do have sort of an expansionist foreign policy idea, but it has nothing to do with military conquest or with dropping nuclear weapons and then being forced into oblivion themselves. I mean, it's just a wild fantasy that they're going to do that. And Ahmadinejad basically was talking sort of theologically and long-term and apocalyptically about stuff. He wasn't talking about using nuclear weapons or even starting wars.
Right. Now, in your book, you say some things that really caught my eye, saying that, well, I mean, this atomic obsession that we have, it's perhaps overblown, because even if the bombs went off, the destruction would not be as big as scientists have usually warned. And you mentioned a case that, you know, really caught me by surprise. You were saying that if a nuclear bomb were to explode in the middle of Central Park in New York, it wouldn't hurt much of the surrounding buildings. And, you know, I was surprised by that datum. I wonder where you got that information from and, you know, how that contrasts with conventional wisdom among scientists.
It is conventional wisdom among scientists. We're talking obviously not about a huge bomb, but a smaller bomb of the sort that a terrorist could launch, or even a Hiroshima bomb, which is small by the other standards. At Hiroshima, if you were about 5 kilometers away from the blast, there would basically be no problem at all. There might be some broken glass or something. That doesn't mean the bombs are not terrible. They didn't kill a lot of people, but the point is that it was not like total destruction. So one should keep in mind the capacities of these weapons. They are bad, and obviously I don't deny that at all. But they are not. It's not the idea that you could wipe off the human race from the planet and things like that. That's basically scientific nonsense. There's a book by a physicist at Berkeley by the name of Miller, and he has a picture of San Francisco with a Hiroshima bomb or a terrorist type bomb that could go off in it and in the middle of San Francisco, and it's a matter of just a few blocks that would be destroyed. That would be a terrible thing, of course, but it is not the destruction of San Francisco.
Well, but what about the long-term effects, such as acid rain and, you know, radiation and even what Carl Sagan called nuclear winter? Because, I mean, the major concern is that all the dust going up on the air because of the blast could block the rays coming in from the sun, and, you know, that would lower the temperatures, crops would fail, there would be major starvation, and, you know, and the rest of the apocalypse. And I can think of scientists such as Carl Sagan, but there are many others who warn that, you know, maybe if a bomb goes off, it will not kill immediately a lot of people. Well, obviously it will, but I mean not on a planetary scale. But give or take 5 or 10 years, maybe this could end the human species. I mean, was Carl Sagan also part of this atomic obsession? Was he an alarmist?
No, he was. A lot of people have criticized his statistics and so forth, but what he was talking about in that case is not a bomb or a few bombs going off, but tens of thousands of bombs going off around the world. And he was arguing that there would be that potential effect, the nuclear winter effect. And as I say, that's fairly questionable, but nonetheless, We're not talking about anything that remotely that Iran or North Korea could do. He was talking basically about the United States and Soviet Union throwing everything they've got at each other. In terms of the long-term radiation effects, it seems to be really quite limited. There's been huge studies of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the long-term effects, both in terms of birth defects and in terms of radiation sickness, seems to be extremely limited. It's not at all clear, in fact, that the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are more likely to get cancer. And of course, this is now 70 years later, so there's been a long time for them to develop. So there's some problems, particularly in the first few years here and there, but those are fairly small. And the long-term effects seem to have been, if there is one, it's pretty small and basically not even measurable.
Right. And what about the return of Russia? I mean, after the Cold War, it appeared that Russia and the West would be allies because, communism was down. But over the last few years, the situation has been changing, especially because of the situation in the Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. Right. And you were saying that, Carl Sagan warned about a full confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that's not what we have in mind here, because, what we're talking about is terrorists getting a hold of small weapons or of small states such as Iran or North Korea. But the case of the resurgence of Russia seems to be another matter. Would that take us to a new Cold War, and in that sense, nuclear escalations again? And in that scenario, would nuclear weapons be more dangerous again?
Well, I don't think so. Nuclear weapons don't seem to be... One of the things that hasn't been brought up very much in this whole thing is the issue about a big war, and particularly about a nuclear war. What Putin has been doing is poking at the fringes a little bit and doing things which make more sense emotionally than anything else. But he's been very careful about really pushing very hard. And the idea of getting into a nuclear war, or even a big conventional war, is extremely unlikely. For one thing, he doesn't have the military capacity to do it, though his nuclear force could obviously cause a lot of damage. What seems to be happening, in fact, is we've got kind of a doomsday machine that's happened. In the sense, it's an economic doomsday machine, because of his encroachments and his pushing into Ukraine, and particularly, and then of course in Crimea, southern Ukraine. He's in the process of almost destroying the Russian economy. The capital is flying. People are not willing to invest. Unemployment is up, and the ruble has dropped enormously. They're having enormous pain. And on top of that is now, of course, the decline of oil prices, which you probably know about in Venezuela quite a bit.
Of course.
So the point is that a lot of that has come because people no longer are willing to trust him, and particularly Europeans. And that's going to go on for a long time. It's going to take a long time for the Russians to build back trust, economic trust, and people wanting to invest in Russia. So he's going to be taking a fair amount of punishment for these very minor problems, and he seems to be increasingly concerned about that.
Right. Many analysts have said over the years that if a nuclear holocaust, and of course, this very word nuclear holocaust is also alarmist, and I suppose you don't agree with that description, but bear for me for a minute. Many analysts have said that if some nuclear catastrophe were to happen, it wouldn't be between Russia and the United States, or between Iran and Israel, or North Korea and South Korea, but rather between India and Pakistan. And, we don't hear much about them. We haven't talked about it in this conversation. Is there a real danger there?
I think not. Obviously, if anything, the Pakistanis, because of the American efforts in the Middle East, now Pakistanis see the United States as the big enemy, even though the United States is giving them billions of dollars of aid every year. And they're focusing less on India. The stockpiles in both countries are fairly small, and the spaces, of course, are very large. A nuclear war would be a disaster, terrible, and so forth, but it would certainly not be a holocaust in terms of the world overall. And I think it's wildly unlikely. Both India and Pakistan have gained nothing from getting nuclear weapons, except they can brag about the fact that they have them. It seems to me neither one has been interested in getting into. There has been no war between them, direct war, reasonable war for now 40 years, 50 years almost. And so, consequently, when we're talking here now, not a nuclear war, but even any kind of substantial war between armed forces of the two sides, you haven't had one since the 1970s. And I think that's extremely likely to continue.
Right. Culturally, what do you think it's pushing the atomic obsession? I mean, we all see these movies, Doctor Strangelove, and everybody talks about this, and the media pushes these issues. What's driving the atomic obsession? How come this doesn't seem to be only a thing about politicians? I mean, the common citizen seems also to be obsessed. Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from the initial horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Partly from exaggerated effects of reports of what the bombs do, and the whole idea of being killed by nuclear, being killed by radiation and so forth, is particularly horrible. So there's a lot of opposition, even obviously, to nuclear power, which is not the same as nuclear bombs, obviously. So it does seem to come out of that whole syndrome. And it's not clear it's going away. We still have it. I wrote the book to try to put some balance into the discussion, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
All right, Professor John Mueller, thank you so much for taking our call. He's the author of the book Atomic Obsession, Nuclear Alarmism from Hiroshima to Al-Qaeda.
Thanks very much.